Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Before I get started, can I please just do my usual check? So in the chat, could somebody tell me if you can see me, if you can hear me, and if you can see my screen, please? That would be much appreciated. Cool. Thank you very much. Okay, so today's webinar is all about an introduction to MegaEdit's 3D preview capabilities. And I'm putting the emphasis there on introduction because this is a very big and very expansive potential topic. But I do want to show you what it's capable of and sort of the fundamentals of what the setup of these products is as well. Now, I'm going to get my, my excuses out of the way early here. So my connection is on and off a little bit spotty at the moment. There's a very low chance that I might go offline, but I should be back on within a couple of minutes if that's the case. Hasn't been a problem recently, but just in case. And if there's any noise in the background that you can hear, it's because the people having work done next door have decided to start their drill just at this moment. So apologies if you can hear that. So I'm joined today by Hector. I always have a member of our team on board as well who knows a little bit more than me about the topic we're discussing. Today it's Hector, who's part of our front-end team. He's a developer. Amongst his many Infigo-based talents, he's created a lot of these 3D products for our customers. So one of the usual ways in which the implementation of this 3D preview goes is customers have our team create it and implement it for them. Hector's one of the primary guys that works on this. Now, Hector will be manning the chat today. So whilst I'm talking away, oblivious as normal, if you've got any questions, put them in the chat panel down at the bottom of the screen, and Hector will be keeping an eye on that to answer any questions that you've got. Okay, so the agenda today, very, very basic. The first thing I want to do is to actually show you some good examples of these 3D models that we can potentially do. So this is just on demo storefronts, which are openly available for you guys to view and to utilize. And I'll give you the link for that in a moment. And then once I've shown you some of that, I'll introduce you to the model that we're going to be using today, which is a very, very basic one, hence the introduction side of things. And that's the one we're actually going to start to configure using various pieces of software and various bits of functionality. All right, so first thing to give you is the resource link. So this page here is one I've created in association with this webinar. This will show you the demonstration model that we're using. It gives you, if you want to try this out yourself later down the line, if you have access to 3D Preview, it's got a few download files you can utilize. And further down the bottom of the screen as well, you've got loads of helpful tips, example models, and step-by-step guides as to how I'm doing what I'm going to show you. So this will remain active after the webinar, but I'm going to copy that link into the chat now. Okay, so let's get started. So we'll start with some example products. And these example products I have given you links to within that page. So the first section, which is what is the MegaEdit 3D, let me zoom in a little bit on there. That will actually, as well as some other information, has links to these products I'm going to show you if you want to have a look at them yourselves. So just to give you an idea of the expansive capabilities of it, there's a few different products set up in a few different ways. There's no one size fits all for the 3D preview. So a lot of the examples are from one of our fake brands that we've got, so Scoops. And one of these is a pizza box style thing we've got here. And you can see what we're generally doing for this 3D preview is we've got the usual MegaEdit canvas available in there somewhere, which a customer can interact with. So they can add elements to it, they can add and remove things, they can move things around, change images. But what that will do is it will then show that on a corresponding 3D model. And you can see in this case, we've got those both visible at the same time, but that doesn't have to be the case. So what you'll see is if I start moving things around, we get that same update on the 3D model as well. I've then got a very similar product, which is the next one I want to show you. Again, we've got the actual canvas that's showing the die line. And again, the customer can interact with that canvas to change what is actually on the box itself. However, this time we've got additional things available. So as well as giving customers the ability to just add their own artwork to it and sort of drag things around and drop things around, we've got these layouts which we've assigned as well, which is a standard bit of MegaEdit functionality. It's nothing new, but we can utilize that in conjunction with the 3D preview. So for example, if I start utilizing one of these layouts, that will change how our canvas looks. And because it's mapped to the 3D model in a certain way, as we'll see later on, you can see it's having that same impact on the 3D view. So the next product I've got to show you here is just one which is a slightly different product type. So just to show you a bit of variation. What we're looking at this time is a pouch. And the way this is laid out is a little bit different as well. So what we're providing our customers with here is the ability to actually just see the canvas as it's laid out, so the actual die line, and then they can populate it, and then they can access the preview separately. So you can see here that I can make various changes to this. Again, I can use layouts. I can start adding resources. So let's go with some clip art. This is not going to be very artistically sound, but let's go with it. And then once they're finished populating and prepping their product, they can go to preview and see the final results before they place their order. Next product along is a little bit different again. So this is an example where we're using what is in essence just a very 2D product, but we can show that as part of a 3D product. So this example we've got here is just a label. Again, it's fully customizable. We've got a few layouts that are pre-populated in this product. And you can see the main canvas is just showing the label design. However, when we actually go forward to the preview, in this particular example, it's transposing that onto our 3D model of a cup. So we can actually see what that's like in real time. And the last one I've got here is a little bit different again. And this is just showing that it doesn't just have to be, let's say, very linearly shaped products to be able to do this with. Now, obviously, it's a bit more complicated if you look at something like this, but you can use it for things like apparel. As long as you can make the 3D model of it, we can do something with it in most cases. So what you'll see is we've got this hoodie in this particular case, and you can see the interaction experience that the customer gets, again, is something slightly different. So instead of utilizing the main MegaEdit left pane, which I'm sure most of you will be familiar with who are on the call today, we've now utilized this invent style bar over on the right-hand side. And this is using the Infigo form builder. And what this allows you to do, as you can see here, is we can have the 3D view on one side and then the actual inputs to it on the other. So you don't actually need, if not necessary, to have that 2D canvas at all, even though it's still operating in the background. So you can see, for example, we've got lettering that we can input, and then various images, fully customizable, as you would expect. And then the final example before we move on to ours, something very good to show you. However, it's not something that's massively widely available yet. It's in development, it's on the way, and we're going through some developmental processes with it at the moment. But this is parametric packaging. So what I mean by this is it allows us to actually change the size of the product as we're actually modifying it within MegaEdit itself. So this is one example we've got set up. You can access this in those links I've given you. And you'll see that in this particular case, we've been set up with an icon here, a button which says adjust parameters. That allows us to change the size parameters of this particular canvas, and that will have a knock-on effect on our 3D preview. So if I halve the width, for example, we'll see that changes, and our resulting model has changed as well. But we still retain all the customization capabilities. So it still allow us to put imagery into here, change the background, and whatever else you need to do. Right, so moving forward to something a lot simpler, which we're going to be working on today. So you've seen the sort of vast capabilities and different ways this thing can be set up. We're going to be keeping it really, really simple. We're going to be looking at just a simple cardboard box where certain parts of that cardboard box are customizable. So what you can see, we've got our 2D canvas, the usual MegaEdit experience in this case, nothing special is being done. And we've got certain areas where we can customize the content of this cardboard box, whether that be to change the image that's been utilized over here, or to change the text that's been utilized down here, or to change the color of these sections of the die line here. We'll have a look at that in the preview, and this is what we're going to end up with. Okay, so let's get started. Right, so we're going to start off with basically a description of what is MegaEdit's 3D preview. So as you've seen, it provides users with the ability to show our normal MegaEdit products in 3D form. And that allows your end users to really visualize how their product is going to appear before they place their order. Now, what we utilize in order to create this is a freely available piece of software called Blender. Now, this is not associated with Infigo whatsoever. It's just something that we utilize to actually prepare or create these 3D models to actually utilize in this form. And what that essentially is allowing us to do, so if I just show you, this is the Blender screen we're going to be utilizing. What it allows us to do is to link certain areas on our MegaEdit canvas to areas that are on the 3D model itself. So for example, if I look back at one of our example products there, what we've essentially got is areas of this canvas here, which are mapped to specific areas of the 3D model. And what it means is that when we put something on that area of the canvas, it shows it in the resulting location that we've mapped on that 3D model. Right. So as I mentioned, the majority of that setup is done in that Blender package that we'll see a bit later on. What we essentially need out of this is a couple of different resources. We need a 3D model, which we're not going to be creating on the call today. We're going to assume that the 3D model already exists, whether you've downloaded it or you've created it yourself through tutorials, or if you know how to use Blender. We're going to have the 3D model, and then we're going to utilize the 2D side of things as well, which is your template, which could be your die line. It could be just an alternate template format that we'll see as well. Okay, so let me start off our description here with a very high-level overview. So before I dig into the details of prepping this thing, just a quick 5-step basic process as to what I'm going to do, and then we'll go through it in a little bit more detail. So the first thing is to actually gather our resources. This is what I've just been talking about. So you would require a 3D model, which again, we're not going to be creating today. That's just in Blender, or if you get your model from elsewhere. What we're going to be focusing on is just the prep work for that model. And then the 2D image as well. Now, we'll talk about this later on in more detail, but that, as I mentioned, can either be a die line or it can be a template of some other form. It's also worth me saying that you don't just need one template if that's not suitable. So you don't have to have just one image which you link to the entirety of your 3D model. You can have it so there's multiple different pages of canvas which have multiple images which can be mapped to different areas of your 3D model. And again, it's very model and product specific as to how you might utilize those. Step 2, again, which we'll see a bit later on, is linking that 2D image and 3D model. So to do this, we add them to the same Blender file. So again, we're staying out of Infigo at this particular stage. We are just using Blender. We get the 3D model, we get the 2D model, both inside our Blender file. And then what we're essentially doing is defining a material to our 3D model. And we're using the 2D template as the visual appearance of that material. And what it basically means is that we're laying one of them over the other. And as you can see on the image on the left-hand side here, what that will give you initially is just a big mishmash of it trying to transpose that entire 2D model onto the 3D model. It's our job to figure out which bit relates to which and map them together. So as I've just been saying, step 3 is linking parts of your mesh to areas on your 2D template. Now, in a lot of the models I demonstrated there, the entirety of that 3D model mesh will be mapped to the 2D model. And what it basically means is that you can add resources to anywhere on that canvas, anywhere on that die line, and it will show on the 3D model. This is the best way to do it. That means you've got the most versatility. What we're going to do in our example is just map particular areas just to keep it nice and simple. And what it means as a result is we can keep the model in MegaEdit really locked down so that we're controlling what our customers are able to put on. So we keep it within the confines of what we want them to do. Step 4 is to actually configure the MegaEdit product for using in our 3D model. So I'm talking about more of the back-end side of things here. It's actually very, very easy to do this. So what we're essentially doing is once we've set up the Blender file, we're exporting a JSON file from Blender that we'll see a bit later on. And then there's a couple of lines of code that we need to change. And then we put that JSON file into our Infigo storefront. We've got a little bit of config for our 3D preview, which again, you need to modify 1 or 2 lines of it to make it compatible. Paste that into your MegaEdit product. And beyond actually doing your usual MegaEdit configuration, so canvas specification, stock specification, output type specification, that's really all that you need to do. So the actual specification of the 3D preview in MegaEdit's side of things isn't too bad at all. Most of the prep, as I've mentioned, is in Blender. And then finally, step 5 is the setup of the MegaEdit editor experience. Now, this is where that versatility comes in. So we've seen loads of different examples of the different ways you can set this up. But you're just basically making it a nice experience for your customers. And how you do that will depend on your particular product. Right. Let me just skip through my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so I want to spend a few minutes talking about what you actually need for MegaEdit 3D. There's a few different moving parts which are required for this. A few I've mentioned already. The first and foremost, though, is that the 3D preview side of Infigo is a separate module. So it's a separate license. So if after you've seen this, you are keen to try it out, or you are keen to get more information, then get in contact with your customer success manager, which will be either Rob or Greg, and they can give you that extra information if you need it. What you'll also need is Blender. Now, this is a specific version of Blender, 2.79, if I get that correct. It's an older version of the, again, freely available 3D modeling software, and it is still freely available for download on the web from Blender's download locations. Now, the reason we need an older version of Blender is because we utilize an add-on or a plugin which is not really compatible anymore with the more recent versions. So there's no problem with using this older one. It's just because we need to use that particular plugin. That plugin is something called 3. And what this basically allows us to do is to export our Blender file in a JSON format that we specifically require. Now, as I mentioned, this add-on has been kind of depreciated over the years, and it's probably quite unlikely to be on the web. So if you do get to the stage where you have the 3D preview module and you want to play around with it, you can ask our team and we'll be able to provide that plugin to you. Going down the list to something a little bit less, let me get to this list on here as well. So the next thing I would recommend, but is not necessary by any means, is Visual Studio Code. This just makes it a bit easier to do that couple of editable lines of code when you need to. So you can easily just use Notepad as well. This just makes it a bit clearer where you need to do those changes. So you will need the ability to create your die line or some form of template that we're going to use for the 2D element of our preview. Again, this could be multiple different software packages. Most of you probably have access to Adobe Suite, so Illustrator or Photoshop is fine. You might have your own package, your own capabilities of creating die lines, whatever else. If you're in a pinch, even Paint might suffice for something basic. Now, I contemplated not putting this one on here, but we do have a recommendation of a physical mouse. So rather than your laptop mouse, if you are using Blender, and I did try this for a little while, using that without a mouse and just using a trackpad on a laptop or something is incredibly difficult, if nigh on impossible, I think. I'm sure Hector will be able to do it. But yes, I'd recommend a physical mouse. You will need some MegaEdit knowledge. So especially the stuff I'm going to be talking about today, it is assuming that you've got some level of MegaEdit knowledge already. Things just like setting up your canvases, setting up default product configurations and all that kind of good stuff. You will need that. The sort of 3D preview element is just sort of a bolt on the end. Now, there is the Infigo Academy, which has loads and loads of resources on MegaEdit. So if you need help with that, we do have it in video form. And of course, if push comes to shove, you can contact our support team as well. Okay. And then finally, what I've put on here is Blender modeling knowledge. So if you are planning to create your own 3D models, you will require some knowledge on how to construct those using Blender. What I've discovered as well is that you can import other types of model in there as well. So if you're familiar with another 3D modeling platform, you might be able to create it in there and export it in a file which is relevant for import into Blender. So the capabilities are there, and we can provide more information if required. You do also have the option, although it might need a little bit more thought, to download models from the open web. So there are various websites available where you can download these Blender models. Some of them that you download might not be in the correct state to immediately use to create a 3D preview from. So there is a caveat to that, but just so you know, resources are available on the internet for you to download these already created 3D models. But it might need a bit more work to get it in the right state to use it. Right. Okay, so as I've mentioned, the key to this is having both our 2D and our 3D templates. Now, your 2D template, as we've seen on many of our example products, and this is my very, very basic example here, would usually, let's say, be a product die line. And this would form the main content of your MegaEdit canvas onto which your end users can add their own personalization. Now, this 2D template allows us to ensure that elements such as imagery and text are added to the correct place on the canvas relative to what we're going to set up inside Blender itself. And this is true for both the final output file and for the 3D preview. So we want to make sure that the ultimate aim of this is to still make sure we end up with a relevant output file that we can send to our printer. It's not all about the 3D preview. This is just for making it look pretty. Now, as we'll see, the 2D template is also used within Blender and is key to identifying certain areas of the die line to which faces on our 3D model are going to be linked to. So we've got this, if we've got this template here, we're going to have certain areas of it, like here or up here maybe, where we've mapped certain elements on our 3D model to that particular 2D model. Now, what we need to remember as well is that sometimes our products might not lend themselves exactly to a die line. So that hoodie we had, for example, is a fantastic example. You're not going to really utilize a die line for that. So what you might have is, and again, this is a very basic example, is something like this template here, where it just gives you areas to input specific things onto your canvas. Now, what we've got here, for example, is just the ability to select a couple of different colors. We've got an area where we can input the image. And then in theory, what that would do is we can then click preview and it would put those in the correct places on our 3D model. But again, it's very model specific. And this is a great example for having something hidden in the background, like we had with our hoodie, where you don't actually see the 2D canvas. It is still there, it is still operating, but you're bypassing it as part of the product setup. So I kind of touched on this before, but please do note that you don't explicitly have to have just one die line or template. So Blender will let you assign different images to different areas on your 3D model, because this might be more applicable to your particular application. However you choose to create your die lines or your templates, ensure that you export them with the relevant textures or coloring. And again, we'll see this a bit later on. Okay, right, so let's actually get on with doing this rather than just me talking about it. So the first step is we actually want to add our die line into our 3D Blender model. So again, you've got the ability to download this model if you want to play around with this in future, or if you even just want to play with it in Blender. You don't need any Vigo license to play around with the model in Blender. So what I want to do first of all is to actually import our 2D model into this Blender model. So to do this, I'm just going to go down to our UV image editor, and I'm going to open our relevant model. So there we go. I've got my 2D die line. Now this will form the basis of our texturing of the 3D model. So our aim in later steps is going to be, as we've mentioned, to dictate which particular areas of that 2D model are associated with faces or elements on the 3D model. The next step here is to actually define the material. Now the material, as I kind of alluded to earlier on, is something that's actually going to skin that 3D model that we're making. So you'll see, if I come over to the right-hand side and click on materials, which is this one here, I can add a new material, and you see that instantly that's changed the color of the 3D model because it assigns the basic core material that we've made to that particular 3D model. The next thing we have to do is to actually tell the system that we want to use this 2D model as the skin for this 3D model. To do this, I'm just going to go to our node editor. Now, again, I'm just keeping this super simple, so it's not kind of like a button clicking guide. It's just sort of a general process overview. And what we're doing is we are adding a new section into here, which is, let's find it. So it's image texture. We can link this to our section here, which is part of the material. So I can link those colors together. And then as part of this image texture, I can choose one of those images that I've already uploaded. In this case, it was my die line. So I click on there, and you can see that in my case, it's automatically done that. It's automatically taken that die line and started trying to wrap it around our 3D model. However, at the moment, it's complete nonsense, which is fine at this stage. Okay, so I'm just checking my notes. Right, so if you do end up trying this yourself, it might not always be that that happens straight away. You actually need to perform, I think it's called a UV mapping, to actually take those elements from the 3D model onto our actual 2D template. So I'm just going to go back to our UV image editor. And then on the 3D model, I can click on Tab to get to editor mode, A to select the whole thing. And you can see in my case that it's actually done this already. However, if we haven't done it, there's loads of tutorials for Blender on the internet, by the way, if you need to do this later on. But I can hit the U key. That does my UV mapping. And then in this case, I've gone for Smart UV mapping. And what that does is it just takes all of the elements and just throws them as different islands, so different sort of element groups, onto our 2D model. But at the moment, it's just one big mess. Okay. Right, so our next step is to actually link certain areas of the, as we've been talking about, areas of the 3D model onto our 2D model. Now, this is where it gets a bit fiddly, so I'll be amazed if this works perfectly first time. But what we basically want to do is, so if I find specific areas of this model, and I want to select the elements that I require within here. Now you see there, when I select certain elements, the same corresponding set of elements will be shown over on the right-hand side. So that's where it is located at the moment. And what I can do over on the right-hand side is then move that around. So I can go to sort of select the element group, and then I've got to remember my key prompt. I think it's G, which allows me to actually move that around and position it. Now, one thing I've seen here is that the aspect ratio of the elements is not the same on both. That's not something I came across during my testing for this, so I don't know the exact solution. However, we'll continue, seeing as it's just a basic example. But what you can see I've done is I've positioned that element group onto that particular area. And we can do this with a few different areas. So for example, if I select this section here, that'll be down there. So again, I can move this around. That would be over here. I'll do one here. And then I'm also going to do it so we can change the color of these top sections. So I'll just do one or two of these just as our example. So if I select that one there, again, that's highlighted those elements, and I can move that around. You've also got other options available as well for these element groups, such as rotating them or rescaling them if you need to. So I can say R to rotate. And you can see that as I'm moving them around, it actually does change what's visible on the actual 3D model itself. So you can actually see if you're doing it correctly. So let's go back to my other one I specified just as an initial and make sure that's the right way around. So you can see that as I move that onto my colored section there, it's not doing it in the right configuration. So I might want to rotate that. And then I can use S to rescale. And there we go. Now, the last thing to do is make sure that we've, well, as I said earlier on, the ideal scenario is that you map every single element there to specific areas on your 2D model. That means anywhere that somebody puts something on that box in 2D will get shown in 3D. We're not going to do that in our example just for the sake of simplicity. So what we want to make sure is that all of these other areas aren't interfering. The easiest way I found to do that is just to make sure everything's selected, deselect the islands that we don't want to use, so the ones that we've already positioned, for example. And then the ones that are remaining, I can just click S, rescale those, and just put those into a little tiny corner, which I'm not going to do anything with. So now that's always going to be that color that's on the die line. Okay, 1 second again, just checking my notes. Okay, now that in terms of our configuration, obviously very, very basic and it's not complete in our example here, but methodology wise, that is pretty much all we need to do. So what I can do at this stage is go ahead and export the JSON file. So again, this is where we require that 3 plugin that requires you to have that Blender 2.79 that I was talking about, the specific version of Blender. If I go to File, Export, if I've got the plugin available, I can go 3.js. And then I can just export that into there. Now, chances are you're not going to get this configured perfectly first time when you're trying this out. So you will probably have to come back into Blender eventually and sort of make some tweaks. But in terms of our first foray into Blender, that's all we need to do. We're now ready to actually go and start specifying some things inside MegaEdit itself. So, as I mentioned, there's a couple of small tweaks to lines of code that we need to do. So let me just find the model that we were working with. This is the JSON file that we exported. And what you can see that contains is just a lot of information, which isn't really human readable. However, what we're looking for, I think it's that section in the middle there. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry to make everybody dizzy. So there's a section in the middle there. And we're focusing on a very specific bit of this, which is this DGB name. So the DGB name is Blender and the JSON referencing the material that we created inside Blender itself. Now, in the context of our JSON file here that we're going to put in MegaEdit, that name of the material has no real meaning. So we need to replace this and add an additional line of config in there as well. So what we're actually going to replace that with is, well, we're going to make it suit the page of the MegaEdit canvas that's going to host its contents. So what I mean by this, if we are doing a die line on our MegaEdit canvas, which is the whole product, we're only going to have one page in our MegaEdit product. So therefore, we just need to reference this material as being page 1 of our MegaEdit product. And what that's doing is so our material was our die line that we specified in Blender. This is going to make sure it's actually referencing the corresponding MegaEdit canvas, which, by the way, should be the same size. So if I put that in here, so I've got the code already copied here, so I can cheat slightly. And the second line as well. There we go. So DGB name has now been replaced with Catfish page 1. And for those that don't know, Catfish is the old name for Infigo. That's specifying page 1. And then we've got, so just, that's available in the step-by-step guides I've given you if you need to copy it. And all you need to change if you've got multiple changes is the number there. And then we've got this map diffuse as well. Now, my understanding of the map diffuse is it just giving a backup file for that particular artwork. So this case, it's not my file.png, it's whatever the name of our file was or will be that we upload to MegaEdit. So to use as our 2D template. So I think mine was called dieline.png. That's it. So I can save that. Now, the next thing we've got is the actual config code for that's going to be included inside MegaEdit itself to actually configure the 3D preview. So you can use Visual Studio Code again, or you can utilize Notepad. Again, I've got it copied here, so I'm just going to cheat. That's a lot of spaces, so I'm not sure it's going to be too happy. We'll work with it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Right, so what we need to do in here, and remember, this is the config for the 3D preview itself. This will go on your MegaEdit product. There's 2 lines we need to fill in. It's the scene link and software renderer scene. And what we're looking for here is a link to our JSON file that we've just been editing. Now, at the moment, we don't have a link, but we need to actually upload the JSON file and our corresponding 2D die line or template into our MegaEdit or into our Infigo storefront. So if I go to, I've got a lot of pages open, so bear with me. This one here. So I'm going to start this from scratch by going to CSS override. Now, many of you will be familiar with the CSS override area. One of its functions is the ability to upload additional resources to your storefront for use in various locations. So you can see I've already got a couple of them uploaded into here as I've been practicing for this webinar. I'm also going to choose our new JSON file that we had. If I go here, so our starter model, upload, and you're going to see there that will give us an associated link that we can utilize. And that's what we need to take into that config that we're currently making. Now, we'd also upload our 2D template as well in the same way. I've already got that from a previous iteration I've utilized, so that's fine. I've already got that in there. However, I do need to take this text here, this link, go back to my config, and then I'm going to paste that in both of those top 2 sections, but I'm going to replace that unique identifier there with 0. So a little bit of messing around with the lines of code, but not too much. That's all we need to do. So let's put that to one side. Now I'm going to create our MegaEdit product. So same way as you would normally create a MegaEdit product, no difference in this particular scenario. So I'm going to rush through this. If I go to product management, add new, choose MegaEdit product. Let's put 3D preview webinar. And then we're going to jump straight to our MegaEdit config. Now, again, most of you should be familiar with this, I think. A couple of changes we're going to make. One is the number of pages. We're using only one page because our entire die line is going to be on the one page. If I scroll down a bit, I'm going to make sure my preview type is using 3D preview, which will be available to you if you have the module. And then we've got our preview config. Now this is where I'm just going to copy and paste from here. Okay, I'm going to save that. Now again, as we normally would, we've got our specification of required resources and optional resources to use in the model. So required ones, canvas, stock, output type. Optional ones, things like clip arts, fonts, spot colors, that kind of thing. So I'm not going to go through making those on this webinar. Again, there's loads of resources on the Infigo Academy. I'm just going to actually assign them. The only one I'm going to point out is the canvas, because that does need to be the same size as the image that you were utilizing inside Blender itself, because then it knows which areas of the canvas to map to areas of the image and then the 3D model. So, assuming I'm selecting the right ones here from my previous attempts. Another one I'll draw your attention to is the actual clip arts. So what I'm going to do is create or import some clip arts, which is not going to be visible to the customer, but is visible to the administrator. And this clip art category is going to contain the actual image of the die line itself, so our 2D template. Now, it may or may not be exactly the same image that you utilized in Blender, but basically it's going to give your customers the workspace that they need. So some kind of reference as to where they need to put things to get it to appear on the 3D view. I'll show you those in a moment. Let me assign some more. I think that's all we need. Let me check my notes once again. Okay. So let me launch this product config, view product page, and let's give that a launch. See if I've set it all up correctly. And there we go. So one thing I'll point out here, and again, it's because there's multiple ways of setting this up. This is just the way I've decided to do it. I've created a stock, which is, let's say very roughly, the same color as the cardboard stock that we're going to actually print our things on. And the reason I've done that is because our final print output file, we don't want it to have that coloring. If we assign it to the actual stock section of MegaEdit, it means that we can get that color in the background of our preview like this, but it won't be on the final output file. And that will have a knock-on effect on the image I use for our die line and for our template, and I'll show you that in a moment. However, for the moment, so we've got our canvas, and if I go to preview, what we should see is our brown box, because it's using the canvas that we've specified, which is currently empty apart from the coloring. So there we go. Okay, the final step is configuring your MegaEdit product for 3D preview, so the front end of things. Now, this section now will be very familiar to people who've worked in MegaEdit a bit. We are just configuring what the default template looks like. I'm going to start off with our die line that I've imported. Now, you'll see here that I've imported two different versions of the die line. Again, this is just my example. There's different ways of doing it. One option is just to import the image as we had it in Blender. So it will have a static color for the actual cardboard stock itself, but that would then go into the output file unless we specified otherwise. The way I'm going to do it is to utilize a transparent version of my template. So I've still got my die line, but now my coloring is coming from the actual canvas underneath. And again, one of many ways of doing it. Okay, we're then going to start specifying our different fields. So because I've only done very specific areas of the canvas, we don't want to give people free reign to put things anywhere they want on the actual canvas because it just won't match up. So because we've only mapped certain areas, we want to be quite careful. So if I go and add an image, I specified something over here. Now remember, that is this area here that we specified. Now mine's likely not going to match up very well. Let me try and make it the same size. See what happens. I can do one up here to change the coloring of this section of the box. And then we had a couple of sections there and there. Again, there might be a bit of trial and error to get these in exactly the right place and exactly the right configuration. I'm just being very, very quick. Okay, so what we should find, if I now drag in an image, make sure it works. Go to my preview. And we can see that the configuration is not quite right. However, we can see that it has actually started to map one thing to the other. So there's more work to do. We'd have to go back to Blender and make some changes, make sure the ratio of those elements is correct and that kind of thing. However, we can see that it has changed the color of our box here. It has put the logo on there, although albeit slightly differently than we wanted. It has started putting the text on, although it needs to be rotated. Trial and error process. And we can see we're on our way. And after a little bit of playing around, as we saw earlier on, what you should end up with is something like this. Right, okay, so that is the introduction I wanted to give you. That's the main content I wanted to share with you today. Of course, if you do have the 3D module and you want to play around with it, then you're more than welcome to do so. If you are interested in it, then do get in contact with your customer success manager. And I also need to say that we do have the ability in-house and the skills in-house, as evident by Hector, who's joined me today. We can make these models for you. So if you're not in the position to be able to do them and to configure them, we do offer the services to be able to do that as well. However, I think that's all I wanted to show you today. So let me just see if there's any questions. Always been very quiet in the chat. Hector's had an easy time of it today. Yes, if you have any questions right now, please do put them in. I'll answer them if I can, or Hector will write some answers. But apart from that, if you don't want to wait around for any potential Q&A, all that's left to be said is thank you once again for attending. I hope it's been useful for you. This webinar will be available to watch again if you really want to on the Infigo Academy, and I'll try and upload that later on today. The next webinar topic currently to be decided, but it should be about 1 month from now, and you can sign up in the same way. So just watch out for a an announcement inside your Infigo platform, or we send out a bunch of emails as well. And do feel free to sign up. But yeah, apart from that, thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you next time.